My name is Dave Perry. I teach animation in the Digital Arts and Animation program. I've been part of Project X since the first film. The idea is to take, while the students are in school, to give them as close to a job environment experience as possible, both in terms of requiring them to do their own kind of self-organization and to take responsibility for their portions of production, but also to introduce them to really intensive and long-term team collaboration environment. Are all structured to try to recreate what a job environment in the student's prospective industry would be like. Project X takes the form of an animation studio. It is cross-disciplinary, and we incorporate students from all of the concentrations in DAA, and we also incorporate the audio program. All of the films have their sound design, which is all the sound effects and the scoring created by students in the audio program. I'll kind of touch on that process as we go along. In fact, all of the real-world projects are envisioned to ideally be multidisciplinary, even though each department kind of takes the lead in managing one. Game has Game Studio, DA has Project X, Audio has MediaWorks, and CS has DataWorks. They all try to come up with a structure and a subject matter that allows for the integration of students from other programs. But I will kind of show you just kind of like a sizzle reel from some of the stuff the students have done over the last decade. It starts with concept artists to do illustrations, to come up with the look and the design of what we want to create. It's much quicker for I say traditional, although everybody works on the computer these days, but essentially an illustrator to run through iterations and possibilities and designs to come up with a vision for the piece than it is for us to kind of try out different production styles. It takes us much longer to develop models and rigs and textures and lighting and things like that. So we really incorporate entertainment design where they get their chance to do storyboard work for a long form narrative, in addition to doing all the design and color work for elements within the film. That will then go to modeling and then onto technical art and animation until finally we go into lighting and compositing. Towards the end, after animation is done, we bring music in to have the scoring of the sound design done. When you're doing an individual class assignment, there's a target and a goal. There's the letter of what the assignment is, and you do your best to approach that. And the assignment's done when the assignment's due, and whether you really feel like you achieved your goal or your target or not. And then you get a grade based on that. Well, one of the facets of all of the real world production studios is that there isn't necessarily, well, there is a drop dead deadline, but your individual tasks are performed on or created on an as soon as basis. You don't get a weekly assignment. There's a long list of things that need to be worked through, and there's an idealized production schedule that we want to stick to. When possible, you work faster than that, and when things don't actually hit their mark, you may wind up on that task longer than you expected because you haven't achieved a successful result. And it's the project managers, whether it's a core group of students on the project that have been designated, or it's the instructor that determines when things are good enough to be implemented. And the consequence, the reason why it's so important is that just like in a real world situation, if you do B work for what for your task in the sequence of things that need to be done, the next person that's supposed to use that is now working with B level work and in trying to create A level work with their tasks. And so the work that you create, the strengths and the weaknesses of it have a carry-on effect throughout the entire production. And so one of the things that some students really, or rather all students experience, some enjoy, some less so, uh, is that your assignment isn't done when it's done. Your assignment's done when it is appropriate to the production. For concept designers, one of their main challenges is not to come up with a design for something, but to come up with a variety of design options, and then that gets narrowed down, and they do iterations, kind of variations on that theme until the one is looking close enough or good enough for what the production is looking for, and then that one is selected and it's refined, and then it moves on down through the process. Characters are designed, environments are designed, props are designed, the physical objects that characters would be interacting with, the color of the various scenes of the film are designed, and it becomes the visual blueprint for the rest of the production. Next stage is modeling. So the modelers get the designs from the concept team, and then they have to translate that into 3D geometry for the production. In PX, we do entirely 3D films. I shouldn't say entirely. There are 2D elements in our final films, but they're predominantly 3D animated films. And so a modeler's task is to strike a balance between being efficient with the geometry, meaning how many rectangles you see in that image. If you put a lot of them in, it can be very easy to get the shape that you want, but it can be very slow when it animates, and it can be very difficult to prepare for animation. So you want it to be as minimal as possible, so that it animates well, but at the same time has enough definition so that you get the shape that you're after. And so the model has to analyze the design and make decisions about how they're going to arrange the geometry and how they're going to create the form so that it looks the way we want it to look, but it also moves and animates in a believable way as we move into the next stages of production. At this stage, also start taking a look at texturing, which is essentially putting digital paint onto the characters. All the colors that show up in final render are applied through a variety of programs that allow you to actually paint on the digital model and determine what the surface is going to look like, whether it's transparent, whether it's opaque, is it shiny, is it metallic, is it scratched, is it a solid color, is there color variation to it, things like that. If anybody has been wondering what the heck technical art is, technical artists do a variety of tasks. I would say that if there was one thing that would be common to all technical artists is that they understand how 3D works probably better than any of the other disciplines, because one of their jobs is to kind of glue all the stages together. A technical artist can do anything from rigging, which is what I'll show you an example of in a second, to writing custom programs. We oftentimes call them just generically tools that automate certain processes and help the production move faster. So when you get that model, that's too much for the animator to actually work with, and so there was a skeleton that's built inside of the model, and then control handles that are attached to it, and the animator actually works with those control handles. So if you take a look at the screen right now, these red bones here are the skeleton, and then these multicolored wires are the actual handles that the animator will be manipulating to create the actual animation. So I'll play this, and this is just going to show animation as it's applied to the skeleton without seeing the geometry at all. The animator would never see this, but so you kind of understand what's going on under the hood. This is what the skeleton animation would look like, and then there's a process of binding the mesh or the model to that skeleton so that it moves and deforms along with it. Animation is more than just movement or motion. It's performance, acting performance. One of the things that is key to a good character animator is being a good actor. That doesn't mean that you have to be comfortable on stage. In fact, oftentimes the joke is that character animators are shy actors. We like the idea of performing, but we don't like to do it ourselves. So we use animation as a proxy for that. And animators really think about the approach to animating a scene much the same way an actor or an actress would. What is going on? What is the character interested in? What is the goal? What does the character bring to the scene, and what are they reacting to in the scene? One of the biggest challenges for an animator is to make it look like the characters are moving themselves, as opposed to looking like somebody else is moving them. And that sounds a little strange, but the concept is you want to find ways to make it look like the characters are thinking and deciding to perform the actions that they perform. Otherwise, it can look like just a bunch of things moving, or puppets moving around. We often call it marionette syndrome. And the motion can look good, but the performance is lacking. The audience identification with the characters isn't nearly as strong, and at times is difficult for the audience to understand what the motivation for the character is. And that's really our entry into the stories to these films. Once the performance has been created, we then need to go and into the stage of lighting and rendering and compositing. And so much like on a live action set, you would put lights in with various intensities and various colors to light the characters in an attractive way that communicates the emotional and psychological tone of the scene, in addition to representing believably the location of the scene, so that it looks good on film. I think a lot of times, I don't know if anybody's seen behind the scenes footage from a live action film on the extras of a DVD or whatever.
Yes, I have. It's awesome.
Yeah. And so, one of the things we oftentimes think about is like, oh, they're shooting outside. And so it's really simple. The sun provides the light. The sun rarely provides attractive light. And so if you ever see an outdoor shoot, you'll see these big kind of scaffolds holding large sheets of white and black material to block the light from certain directions and to bounce the sunlight off of other directions. And then you'll additionally see extra electronic lights, even if it's a daytime scene, in order to get the appropriate lighting for that the directors are looking for. So that lighting has to take place before we can render. We'll then render the film. For many of the films in Project X that are effects heavy, rendering can take an extensive period of time. Our goal on most films, or actually a goal on all films, is to keep the per frame render time to under 45 minutes. So that's the idea there is that when it renders a frame, and there are 24 frames per second, it takes 45 minutes or less to render a single frame. And that, for some people, that sounds really long and slow, and for some people that are trying to get efficient render times, it seems like sometimes seems like an impossible goal. But it's a balance between the believability of the scene and understanding the technology enough to be able to optimize it. We also render out in what are called layers. So objects will be rendered by themselves so that they can be fine-tuned in the process of compositing. So if anybody's worked with Photoshop, you know that, or any digital paint program that has layers, the concept of layers is that you can manipulate the look of a layer and how it blends with the other layers independently. And so by separating elements out, you can really fine tune things. So for instance, the blur effect in this scene, get this to play, is actually not rendered in the 3D software. It's rendered during, or it's applied during the compositing stage. It would probably double the render time per frame if we were to apply that in the 3D rendering software, whereas it would take less than probably 5 to 10 seconds to set the blur settings and take a look and see what that looks like, so that you can then adjust it and fine tune it and go on from there. And so this is another thing that students get to experience is efficient and effective usage of tools. When you're working on just a portion of a project or a stage of a 3D production, you oftentimes don't get insight into the consequences of doing things one way versus another, because you don't really go beyond a certain stage in the kind of the production cycle if you're just doing animation or if you're just doing modeling. So that's lighting and rendering. After the animation is done, and the animation really needs to be, we call it time lock edit, and that it needs to be, the whole film needs to be edited, and it is locked at that point. It may not be composited. It may not be fully rendered. We can do a real quick render without colors. It looks very grayscale, but we can send that off to the audio team at that point. It needs to be locked, because if they start scoring and composing music to the piece, but then we add a couple of frames here and we take some frames, some time out some other place, the music won't sync up, and they would, worst case scenario, they have to adapt and rework part of their composition, which is not always doable in an attractive fashion. So we lock the animation, and then that goes off to audio, and they will then start collecting assets. For sound design, so the students actually do a lot of what is called Foley work, which is real world collection of recordings or creation of sounds for the effects. So if there's a car and there's an engine noise, the students will go out and they will find a couple of different cars and they will record that engine noise, and then select the one that seems to fit the sound, or seems to fit the visual design of the scene and the car the best. And they may digitally modify it a little bit one way or the other, pitch shift it or filter it with their software, but they don't work with rather than working with libraries of sound effects, they do kind of the hands-on high level, the kind of production work that you would expect in a high level production, where you go and you collect and create as much of the sounds yourself, so that you have things that sound authentic as opposed to sound synthesized. For the music, students will score. There's usually a group of students that will work together to not only come up with the musical theme, but then to also work on the arrangement of the instrumentation. As much as possible, the audio team will bring in musicians to perform music, and they will do live recordings of that. For Driven, the motorcycle film, the Stanford University Orchestra was recorded for the performance of that. We had a connection over to the instructor that was in charge of the symphony orchestra over there, and we're able to arrange for them to perform the score for the film that year. Um, Lastly, when the film's done, it gets submitted to film festivals. There's an international ecosystem of film festivals. They're much more friendly to animation than they were years ago. Entire categories or festivals that are designed for animation, very friendly to that. So one of the wonderful things is students get to know that their work is being screened in theaters, and oftentimes the films have been screened locally in the Bay Area, and we've been able to take field trips or excursions to the screening events. San Jose Shorts Film Festival has screened a number of the films, in addition to Cinequest has screened a PX film before. Ideally, and the full focus of this is that the real world production, the main goal of the real world production studios is to prepare the students for their first job, so that when you go on to that job, you're not as bewildered as most most graduates on their first day at work. Yes, there will be many new things to you that you will never have been in that office. You will be meeting new people, but the production environment will be somewhat familiar to you. Your responsibilities will be familiar to you. The concept of being a self-reliant member of a team is something that will not be new to you. And all of those things can really aid in that the first 3-month transition to the job before you feel like you're a veteran, even though you're only a three-month newbie. Just a couple of little extras here. Some people ask what compositing is. This is an example of a composited scene. This is the final look of the scene. And this is just show the buildup of the layers, and each of these layers gets color adjusted or maybe a little bit of touch up, depending on how things look when we first bring them together. So this is the full scene: sky, background, dock, lighting elements. Final layers for look. Rigging. This is an example of a very advanced rig that one of the students developed for the Worlds Apart characters, for facial animation. This rigger, this is very elaborate. This one of the great things that came out of this is this rigger went straight from graduation down to Rhythm and Hues, an animation studio down in LA, to do character rigging and character effects straight out of college and straight onto a feature film production. It's not the normal trajectory of graduates, but it really was the work that they were able to push themselves, push their abilities in implementing in a real world project class that developed the skills that was evident in the portfolio, that then gave them the confidence in the interview that translated into that job. Just an example, you can see the sliders are what is actually manipulating the facial features. So you don't actually have to grab the little handles on the face. That's always an option, but it's much easier to manipulate a slider. It's larger, it orients to the camera all the time. And so you can wind up creating a facial performance or an animation performance much more rapidly than you could if you were just working with controls directly on the character's face. Oftentimes people go, well, so like you like put cloth in and the computer does everything for you, right? And it does when everything is set properly. This is a test from the scene where we saw earlier, where the kid jumps off of the dock, his body was modeled, and then his shirt was modeled separately, and then it was the cloth motion of the shirt was simulated by the computer. But the first time or actually, I don't know, it was the first time, but one of the early times we set this, this happened, and the kid jumped out of his shirt. um, and so they have all these different sliders, like friction and stiffness and elasticity and all sorts of things that you can set for the properties of the clothing, but you have to find the right settings that work for that scene. And for that scene, those settings, or for a different scene, you might want different settings to give you the ideal look that you're looking for that scene. So anyway, sometimes people ask, well, why does animation take so long? Because a lot of times animation is kind of like this. It's like, this is my best, this is what I think should look good. And then you try it out and you find that it doesn't look the way you want it to. And so then it's, okay, so how do we, maybe it's not communicating something in particular. So how do we modify that so it gets closer to what we're after? That is actually, the scoring on this is actually in production right now. And so this is again, story of a Filipino family, a grandmother and granddaughter. By the time the film is done, the granddaughter has graduated from college, gotten married, and is expecting her first child. So this one is a sci-fi, I don't know, kind of I would say cautionary tale about an eminent scientist whose wife passes away, but he decides that that science can overcome everything, and so he brings her back from the dead. Except in the process, there are some hijinks that happen, and during the scientific event, the cat's spirit winds up being put into the resurrected wife's body. Stories from Trouble Brewing on have been student generated. They've been the ones with teacher supervision that have been developing the stories for these films.